The sound that woke me was not a sound of nature. At 6:42 a.m. by the lake, you expect the cry of a loon, the rustle of a deer in the underbrush, the gentle lapping of water against the shore. You do not expect the guttural roar of a diesel engine followed by the rhythmic, hydraulic hiss and metallic clank of a tracked excavator. I sat up in the simple bed of my small fishing cabin, the one my wife Eleanor and I had built with our own hands 30 years ago. The coffee I'd been dreaming of was forgotten. I pulled on a pair of old jeans and a sweatshirt and walked to the single, large window that overlooked the water. And there it was. A yellow excavator, poised like some prehistoric predator, was parked on the narrow strip of grass between my cabin and the lake. My small, wooden fishing dock, the one I had just re-stained the previous summer, was already splintered matchwood. The machine's arm was now raised, the bucket attachment swapped for a vicious-looking claw, and it was taking a bite out of the corner of my cabin's roof. A section of cedar shakes and weathered plywood tore away with a sickening crunch. Standing beside the machine, arms crossed, was Carol Weston. She was the president of the Lakeside Landing Homeowners Association. She wore expensive-looking athletic wear, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe ponytail. She held a clipboard like a scepter. She saw me in the window, and a smirk of triumph spread across her face. She gestured for the operator to stop, and the machine's engine idled down to a low grumble. I walked out the front door, my bare feet cold on the damp earth. I didn't run. I didn't shout. I simply walked toward her, my hands in my pockets. I stopped about 20 feet away. My heart was a cold, hard knot in my chest. But my face, I'm told, was a mask of calm. "Morning, Arthur," she said, her voice dripping with false cheer. "Just doing a bit of necessary compliance work. Your structure was found to be in violation of Article 7, Section 4 of the Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, unauthorized outbuilding within the 50-foot lakefront setback." I just looked at her. I looked at the claw that had just ripped a hole in my roof. I looked at the operator in the cab, a young man who refused to meet my eyes. "This cabin," she continued, tapping her clipboard with a perfectly manicured finger, "has been an eyesore for years. The board voted unanimously for its removal. You were sent multiple notices." She held up the clipboard as if it were a legal shield. "We're just enforcing the rules to maintain community standards and property values. Once this is cleared out, we'll be landscaping the area for a new community picnic spot. It'll be lovely." I remained silent. My silence seemed to unnerve her more than any shouting match could have. It forced her to keep talking, to keep digging her own hole. "If you try to interfere," she warned, her voice losing its cheerful edge and taking on the hard, familiar tone of command she used at board meetings, "I will have the sheriff here in 5 minutes to remove you for trespassing. This is HOA common area now, per the board's declaration. We'll bill you for the demolition, of course, and the fines. The fines are substantial. You should have just complied when you had the chance." I finally spoke. My voice was low, devoid of emotion. "Carol," I said, and her name was a flat, dead thing in the cool morning air. "What is the name of the demolition company?" She blinked, thrown by the question. "What? That's none of your business. It's a licensed and bonded contractor, approved by the board." "And the operator?" I asked, my gaze shifting to the man in the cab. "What's his name?" "I'm not telling you that," she snapped. "Stop trying to intimidate my contractors. You have no rights here, Arthur. You lost them when you ignored our warnings." I took a small, digital camera from my pocket. It was old, but it worked perfectly. I turned it on and began filming. I filmed the excavator. I filmed the damage to my cabin. I filmed the splintered remains of my dock. Then, I filmed her. Her face tightened into a mask of rage. "Turn that off, you can't film me. This is an official HOA action," she shrieked, taking a step forward. I took a step back, keeping the camera on her. "I am documenting the destruction of my private property on my titled land," I said, my voice still level. "You have just admitted, on camera, to ordering this demolition. You have identified yourself as the party responsible." She sputtered, for the first time at a complete loss for words. The performance had failed. The script she had rehearsed in her mind had deviated, and she had no prepared lines for this. She turned to the operator. "Get back to work. Tear it down. All of it." The operator, to his credit, shook his head and shut the machine off completely. The sudden silence was profound. He opened the cab door and said, "Lady, I'm not doing anything else until the cops get here. This feels wrong." Carol's face went from red to a pale, mottled white. She stared at me, her eyes promising a war. She was absolutely certain she would win. She pulled out her phone, her fingers stabbing at the screen. I just stood there, the little camera still in my hand. I thought about the files in my office back in town. I thought about the certified letters she had refused. I thought about the survey plat from 1958 tucked away in a fireproof box. I thought about my job, my career, my entire professional life, which had been a quiet, methodical preparation for a moment exactly like this. She had no idea. She had no idea what she had just done. She thought she was demolishing a cabin. But what she had actually demolished was the quiet, peaceful life I had so carefully constructed since Eleanor passed. She had just handed me a reason to go to work. But before I tell you what I did next, I should probably explain. This wasn't about a cabin, not really. It was about a file folder, a very, very thick file folder. My name is Arthur Pendleton. For 35 years until my retirement 2 years ago, I was the chief of the Code Enforcement Division for Clarion County. My entire life was rules, not the arbitrary, self-serving rules of an HOA, but the real ones. The ones passed by county commissioners and state legislatures, based on engineering principles, public safety, and the unassailable concept of private property rights. I dealt with zoning ordinances, building permits, certificates of occupancy, easements, setbacks, and land use law. My world was one of black ink on white paper, of raised seals and notarized signatures, of survey stakes and plat maps. I was, for lack of a better term, the ultimate bureaucrat, a quiet professional. Eleanor used to joke that my love language was a properly filed permit application. She wasn't entirely wrong. We bought the lot on Lakeside Landing 40 years ago. It was just a patch of woods back then, part of an old farm subdivision. There was no HOA. There were just a half-dozen families who wanted a quiet place by the water. We built the cabin ourselves, over 3 summers. It wasn't a house, it was just one big room, with a small bathroom and a kitchenette, 600 square feet of pine boards, and happy memories. It was properly permitted. I have the original permit, number 84-217, signed by my predecessor, a man named Gus. I also have the certificate of occupancy. I have the original deed, the title insurance policy, and the professional land survey we had commissioned before we hammered a single nail. On paper, that little cabin was as solid and legitimate as the county courthouse. The HOA came along about 15 years later. A developer bought the remaining farmland, threw up a bunch of cookie-cutter McMansions, and established the Lakeside Landing HOA to manage the new common areas, a pool, a clubhouse, a tennis court. The original lot owners, myself included, were grandfathered in. We weren't required to join, but we were given the option to, for a small fee, to get access to the new amenities. Most of us did, for the sake of community harmony. It was a mistake. For the first 10 years it was fine. The HOA was run by reasonable people. They collected dues, mowed the grass in the common areas, and planned a 4th of July barbecue. Then Carol Weston and her husband moved in. They bought the biggest house on the point. Carol, who had never worked a day in her life but had a seemingly endless supply of her husband's money and a desperate need for a fiefdom, immediately set her sights on the HOA board. She was charismatic in a sharp, intimidating way. She talked a big game about protecting property values and enforcing standards. She got herself elected president within a year, and then the reign of petty tyranny began. It started small, fines for leaving your garbage cans out an hour too long. sternly worded letters about the wrong shade of beige on your mailbox. She had a particular obsession with lawns, measuring grass height with a ruler and issuing violation notices if it exceeded 3 inches. I watched it all from a distance. My life was in town with Eleanor. The cabin was our weekend escape. I paid my dues on time and kept to myself. I read the newsletters and the meeting minutes she would send out, and I saw the slow, methodical consolidation of her power. She amended the bylaws to give herself more authority. She created an architectural review committee and appointed herself the chair. She drove out the reasonable board members with constant harassment and replaced them with her sycophants. Eleanor passed away 5 years ago. The grief was a physical weight. The house in town, the one we'd shared for 4 decades, felt cavernous and silent. I found myself spending more and more time at the cabin. The quiet, the water, the familiar scent of old pine. It was the only place that felt like home anymore. I retired and moved there permanently. That's when I fell directly into Carol Weston's crosshairs. Living there full-time, I was no longer an absentee owner she could ignore. I was a flaw in her perfect, curated community. My cabin was old. It was small. It was humble. It didn't match the ostentatious, vinyl-sided palaces she presided over. It was, in her eyes, a blight. The first official notice arrived a month after I moved in for good. It was a violation for unapproved exterior storage, citing the canoe I kept overturned on a pair of sawhorses. I paid the $50 fine without comment. I didn't move the canoe. 2 weeks later, another notice. Another $50 fine. I paid it. I kept the receipts. I kept the notices. I started a file. It was a thin manila folder back then. Then came the notice about the non-compliant facade. The weathered cedar shakes, she claimed, needed to be replaced with one of the 5 approved shades of vinyl siding. I ignored it. The fines started coming. $100, $200. They escalated. I paid every single one. I never spoke to her. I never attended a meeting. I just paid, filed the canceled check, and added the notice to my growing folder. I was creating a paper trail. In my world, a documented history of harassment is a powerful tool. She thought my payments were admissions of guilt. I saw them as evidence of her escalating aggression. On paper, she was the one creating the conflict. I was merely the recipient. The issue of the cabin itself came to a head about a year before the demolition. She discovered the setback rule in the CC and RS. No structures within 50 feet of the high water mark. My cabin, built decades before her HOA existed, sat about 30 feet from it. It was a pre-existing, non-conforming structure. Any first-year law student, or any competent code inspector, knows that this means it's grandfathered into. It's allowed to remain forever unless it's destroyed by an act of God, or voluntarily torn down. But Carol's interpretation of the rules was based on her desires, not legal precedent. Her notices became more threatening. They now cited the setback rule and demanded the cabin's immediate removal. The fines jumped to $1,000 a month. I kept paying. My folder was now a 3-inch binder. I added a new section, photographs. I took pictures of her walking the edge of my property, pointing. I took pictures of her talking to my neighbors, gesturing toward my cabin. I documented every little act of her campaign. One of my neighbors, a timid, older gentleman named Mr. Henderson, told me she was telling everyone that my cabin was dragging down their property values by $100,000. He said she was promising them a beautiful community park and picnic area as soon as the eyesore was gone. She was building a narrative, manufacturing consent for the crime she was about to commit. I knew this was coming. I knew a confrontation was inevitable. She had no reverse gear. Her entire identity was built on absolute authority. To back down from me would be to admit her power had limits, and she could not tolerate that. So I began my own preparations long, before that yellow excavator ever arrived. I did what I do best. I went back to my desk and got to work. The first step was a formal, undeniable warning, an attempt to de-escalate that I knew she would reject, but one that was critical for the record. I drafted a letter. It was not a friendly letter. It was a formal, legal notice. In it, I cited the specific state statutes regarding pre-existing, non-conforming structures. I cited the legal principle of grandfathering. I attached a copy of my original stamped building permit from 1984 and the certificate of occupancy. I also attached a copy of my deed and the original survey plat, clearly showing my property lines extending to the water's edge. The letter stated, in no uncertain terms, that the cabin was a legal, permitted structure on my private property, that the HOA had no jurisdiction over its existence, and that any attempt to interfere with it would be met with swift legal action, both civil and criminal. It concluded with a simple sentence: consider this your final and only warning. Govern yourself accordingly. I sent the letter via certified mail, with a return receipt requested. This is a crucial step. It creates an undeniable record that the recipient received the document. A few days later, the little green card came back in my mail. It was signed, in her flamboyant, oversized script, Carol Weston. She had received it. She could never claim she wasn't warned. Her response came not in writing, but in person. 2 days later, I was sitting on my porch when she marched down the gravel path. She was holding my letter, folded and crumpled, in her fist. She didn't stop at the edge of my lawn. She walked right up to my steps. "I got your little love note, Arthur," she said, her voice tight with fury. She shook the crumpled papers at me. "Do you think these dusty old documents mean anything? I am the president of this association. The board is the governing body here, not some ancient piece of paper from a corrupt county office." I just sipped my coffee. "That ancient piece of paper is a legally binding deed to my land, Carol. And that corrupt county office is the sole authority on land use in this jurisdiction. Your HOA covenants cannot supersede state law or vested property rights." She laughed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. "Oh, you and your big words. Vested rights, jurisdiction. You're just a sad old man in a shack trying to sound important. We had our lawyer look at this. He said we are well within our rights. Your structure is in violation, period." I knew right then that she was lying. No competent lawyer would ever give her that advice. Either she hadn't consulted one, or she had, and was deliberately misrepresenting their counsel. My money was on the former. She was her own lawyer, her own judge, and her own jury. She threw the crumpled letter onto my porch. "The board meets next Tuesday. We will be voting to authorize the removal of this illegal structure. If you have something to say, you can come and grovel. But I promise you it won't do any good. That shack is coming down." She turned and marched away. I calmly picked up the crumpled letter and smoothed it out. It was now another piece of evidence, a formal warning, delivered, received, and physically rejected. I placed it in a new plastic sleeve in my binder. The binder was now overflowing. It was time to buy a bigger one. That was the moment the switch flipped. The phase of passive documentation was over. The phase of active preparation had begun. She had declared war. She had no idea I was the one who wrote the field manual. I didn't go to her board meeting. That would be playing her game, on her turf. My arena was different. It was quieter. It was made of paper and legal precedent. I packed a small bag, locked up the cabin, and drove to a small, clean, anonymous hotel in the next town over. I needed a sterile environment, a command center. I couldn't work with the threat of her appearing at my door again. The first thing I did was call Maria. Maria Sanchez had been my star investigator at the county for the last 10 years of my career. She was sharp, relentless, and had a bulldog's tenacity for sniffing out forged documents and procedural violations. I had mentored her myself. She was now the acting chief in my absence. "Arthur, it's good to hear from you," she said, her voice warm. "How's retirement? Catching a lot of fish?" "More than I can eat, Maria," I said. but I'm calling about work, a personal matter that has become a professional one. I need a favor, off the record for now. I explained the situation. The HOA, the president, the threats, the cabin. I didn't embellish. I just stated the facts as I knew them. As I spoke, I could hear the faint clicking of her keyboard in the background. Maria was already digging. Carol Weston, she said after a moment. Married to Charles Weston, of Weston Financial. No prior history in Clarion County. They bought the property 6 years ago. Let me guess. She talks about property values a lot. It's her entire personality, I confirmed. Okay, Arthur. What do you need? I need a complete file on my own property first. I want every permit, every inspection report, every survey plat, every easement filing associated with Lot 12 of the old Miller Farm subdivision going back to the county's founding. I have my copies, but I want the official, certified copies from the county vault. The ones with the raised seals. Easy, she said. Second, I continued, I need the full history of the Lakeside Landing HOA, their articles of incorporation, all their bylaw amendments. I also want to see the master plat for the new development they built. Specifically, I want to look at the declaration of common areas and any dedicated easements. On it, Maria said. I'm curious about something. You said she wants to build a picnic area where your cabin is. That's the promise she's making to the other residents, I said. And your dock, was that a private dock? Of course. Permitted at the same time as the cabin. Permit number 84-218. I knew the numbers by heart. Interesting, Maria said, and I could hear the gears turning in her head. Because I'm looking at a satellite view from last summer, and it looks like people other than you are using that dock. There's a pontoon boat tied up that I'm pretty sure doesn't belong to a retired county official with a fishing canoe. A cold dread, quickly replaced by a hot, focused anger, settled in my stomach. She has been encouraging it, I said slowly. Calling it the community dock in her newsletters. I've told people it's private, but she tells them I'm just a cranky old man. She can't just declare private property to be a community dock, Arthur. On paper she can't, I said, but in her world, declaration is reality. Okay, Maria said, her voice now tight and professional. I've got a new priority. I'm going to pull the file for the HOA's community dock. The one near the clubhouse. I want to see the permit application for that, and I'm going to cross-reference it with the master plat. There's something fishy here, and it's not the base you're catching. Thank you, Maria. Keep me posted. I spent the next 2 days in that hotel room, which I had converted into a makeshift office. I had my binder, a laptop, and a portable printer. I systematically organized everything. Every fine notice, every canceled check, every threatening letter, every photograph. I created a timeline, a precise chronological record of the harassment. Each entry was a separate brick in the wall I was building. On the third day, Maria called back. Her voice was different. It was the voice she used when she'd found something big. Arthur, she said without any preamble, you need to come down to the office, and you need to sit down. An hour later, I was in my old office at the county government center. Maria had a stack of documents and large format maps spread across the conference table. She pointed to a large, official-looking plat map. It was the master plat for the Lakeside Landing development, filed by the developer in 1999. This is the controlling document for the entire HOA, she said. It legally defines all the lots, the roads, and the common areas. See this shaded green area? She traced a finger along the shoreline in front of the new houses. That's the common area A, the waterfront park, the clubhouse, all that. It was dedicated to the HOA by the developer. She then moved her finger to the west, to the area where the original farm lots were. My lot, Lot 12, was clearly marked. The green shading stopped abruptly at the property line of Lot 11. My property, and the properties of the other original owners, were clear, unshaded, undedicated. "Now look at this," she said, pulling out another document. It was a permit application from 10 years ago for the official HOA community boat dock. The application included a small, hand-drawn map. The map showed the dock being built in Common Area A, right in front of the clubhouse. Standard stuff. We approved it, they built it, it's legal. Then, she pulled out a third document. My blood ran cold. It was a permit application from 2 years ago, filed by Carol Weston on behalf of the HOA. The application was for a dock expansion and reinforcement, but the map attached to it was different. It showed the dock at the end of my property, my dock. She filed a permit to expand your private dock, claiming it was HOA property, Maria said, her voice grim. She was trying to retroactively legitimize her claim that it was a community dock. But look. She pointed to the bottom of the form. In bold red letters, stamped by the county, was a single word. Denied. I remember this now, Maria said. It came across my desk. The application was a mess. The plat map she submitted was a bad photocopy, with markings in crayon. The ownership claim didn't match our records. I denied it for incomplete information and discrepancy with county plat of record. I sent the denial notice right to her. So she knew, she had known for 2 years, in writing, from the county, that my dock was my private property and not part of the HOA common area. She knew her claim was fraudulent, and she had the official rejection notice to prove it. Yet she continued to tell residents it was a community dock. She continued to encourage them to trespass. And she had just demolished it. That was it. That was the bombshell. This was no longer a simple case of harassment or a misinterpretation of the rules. This was willful destruction of property based on a claim she knew to be fraudulent. It was a crime. It gets worse, Maria said, pulling out one last document. It was a copy of the Lakeside Landing, HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions. The document Carol waved around like a holy text. Maria had highlighted a section in Article 2, Jurisdiction. I read the highlighted sentence aloud. The authority of the association shall extend to all common areas as defined in the master plat of record, and to the exterior appearance of all residential lots, as visible from the street. I read it again, as visible from the street. My cabin was not visible from the street. It was down a long, private gravel driveway, completely obscured by a thick stand of pine trees. The only way to see it was to be on my property, or out on the lake. Maria nodded grimly. According to her own founding document, she has absolutely no authority over your cabin. None. Not the color, not the condition, not the existence of it. The setback rule in Article 7 only applies to new construction on the lots her HOA actually has jurisdiction over. It can't be retroactively applied to a pre-existing structure on an exempt lot that her own covenants exclude from her authority. I sat back in my chair. My mind was a flurry of activity, but on the outside, I was perfectly still. I felt a strange, cold clarity, the kind I used to feel before a major enforcement action. Every piece was now on the board. She had no jurisdiction. She had no legal basis for her demands. She was officially notified of her error and ignored it. She knowingly based her actions on a fraudulent property claim that had been officially denied by the county. She had just committed felony destruction of property. I kept the receipts, Maria, I said quietly. All of them. I know you did, Arthur, she replied. So what's the plan? I looked at the mountain of evidence on the table. The plan, I said, is to let her complete the crime. And then, I'm going to introduce her to the real rules. That was the morning of the demolition. After the operator shut down the excavator and Carol was left sputtering into her phone, 2 Clarion County Sheriff's deputies arrived. One was older, with the weary look of a man who had seen every flavor of human foolishness. The other was younger, sharp-eyed, and observant. I'll call them Deputy Miller and Deputy Evans. Carol immediately launched into her performance. She ran to them, her voice pitched with panic and indignation. Thank God you're here, officers. This man, she pointed at me, is interfering with a legal action by the Homeowners Association. He's trespassing on our common land and threatening my contractors. Deputy Miller held up a hand, a gesture that was both calming and commanding. Mom, just slow down. Let's start with your name. She gave her name and title. Carol Weston, president of the Lakeside Landing HOA. She was establishing her authority, playing her role. The deputy nodded, writing in his small notebook. He then turned to me. And you are, sir? Arthur Pendleton, I said. I am the owner of this property. Carol scoffed loudly. He thinks he is. But this land was declared common area by the board due to his persistent violations. He has abandoned his rights. Deputy Miller's eyes flickered toward Carol, a brief, almost imperceptible sign of skepticism. The phrase, abandoned his rights, is a legal fantasy, and he knew it. He turned back to me. Mr. Pendleton, what is your side of the story? This was the moment. This was the official record being created. I did not get emotional. I did not raise my voice. I presented facts, just as I would in a courtroom. At approximately 6:42 this morning, I began, I was awakened by this excavator which was hired by Mr. Weston's wife, Carol Weston. I witnessed it destroy my private dock and then begin to demolish my cabin, which is my primary residence. I came outside and was informed by Mr. Weston's wife that she had ordered the demolition. I made sure to use the phrase, Mr. Weston's wife. It was a subtle but important dig, reframing her from a position of official power to a private citizen. This is my property, deputy, I continued calmly. I have the deed, the original survey, and the building permits. The structure is a legal, pre-existing, non-conforming residence, and it is exempt from the HOA's jurisdiction, according to their own covenants. Carol was practically vibrating with rage. He's lying, he's twisting the rules. Show them the violation notices, Arthur. Show them the fines you paid. He admitted his guilt for years. This was a gift. She had just, in front of witnesses, confirmed the long history of fines. Deputy Miller looked at me. Do you have any of this documentation with you, sir? I do, I said. I walked back into the damaged cabin, my feet crunching on plaster dust near the door, and retrieved a single, waterproof document pouch from my go bag. I never go anywhere without a go bag. From it, I produced 3 items. Not the whole binder, that would be overwhelming and confusing. I chose 3 simple, undeniable things. First, my driver's license, which listed the cabin's address as my legal residence. Second, a certified copy of the deed to Lot 12, clearly naming Arthur Pendleton as the sole owner. Third, the official, sealed Clarion County plat map Maria had given me. I unfolded it on the hood of the deputy's patrol car. Deputy, I said, pointing with my finger. This is the controlling map for the entire subdivision. This green area is the HOA common land. As you can see, it ends here. My finger rested on the line bordering my property. This is Lot 12. My land. There is no HOA easement. There is no dedication. The HOA's own governing documents, which I can provide, state their authority ends where the common area ends. She is on my land. Her machine is on my land, and she has ordered the destruction of my home. Deputy Miller stared at the map for a long time. He traced the lines with his own finger. He looked at the deed. He looked back at the map. He then looked over at the excavator, sitting squarely inside the boundaries of Lot 12. Deputy Evans, the younger one, was watching Carol, whose confident smirk had been replaced by a tight, uncertain line. The performance was failing to sway this new audience. Ma'am, Deputy Miller said, turning back to Carol, this map, which is a legal document filed with the county, seems to indicate this is Mr. Pendleton's private property. It's a forgery, Carol shrieked, her voice cracking. He worked for the county. He's a corrupt bureaucrat. He made that himself. I have our own maps. I have our lawyer's opinion. Okay, ma'am, can you produce that lawyer's opinion or your maps? The deputy asked, his voice still patient but with a new edge of steel. It's at the clubhouse, she stammered. In the files. I can't get it right now. I see, Deputy Miller said. He knew, and I knew, that it didn't exist. Well, What I have in front of me is a certified county document. What you are describing is a civil dispute over property lines. However, he turned to the excavator operator, who had been watching the entire exchange. What I have also witnessed is active destruction of a structure that is, according to this evidence, a private residence. He looked at Carol. Ma'am, you are to order this machine removed from this property immediately. No further work is to be done. If you or anyone working for you sets foot on this property again, Mr. Pendleton has the right to have you charged with criminal trespass. He then turned to me. Sir, because there is an ownership dispute, however flimsy it may appear, I can't arrest her for the damage right now. That will be for the courts to sort out. But I am going to file a detailed incident report. I'll need a full statement from you, on the record. Thank you, Deputy, I said. I would like to state for the record that I have previously warned Mr. Weston's wife in writing that this action would be illegal and that she received this warning. I would also like to state for the record that the value of the destroyed property, including the permitted dock and the structure of the cabin, is well in excess of $10,000. I said that last part very deliberately. In our state, property damage over $2,500 is a felony. I was laying the groundwork. I was putting the word felony into the official record without ever saying it. The younger Deputy Evans was now writing furiously in his own notebook. Deputy Miller gave me a long, appraising look. It was a look of professional respect. He saw what I was doing. Carol was livid. Her face was a thundercloud. She had called the authorities to be her muscle, to validate her power. Instead, they had validated me. They had listened to my quiet presentation of facts over her loud performance of outrage. She pointed a trembling finger at me. This isn't over, Arthur. You will regret this. I will ruin you. I will bury you in lines and legal fees until you have nothing left. Deputy Miller sighed. Ma'am, I'm going to advise you to stop making threats. It's not helping your situation. He turned to the excavator operator. Sir, get your machine off this land, now. The operator, looking immensely relieved, scrambled back into the cab and, with a roar of the engine, backed the excavator off my lawn and onto the gravel path. Carol stood there, defeated and humiliated, as her weapon of choice retreated. She shot me one last look of pure hatred before spinning on her heel and marching back toward her house. After she was gone, Deputy Miller handed me a card with an incident report number on it. It'll take a day or two for the full report to be typed up, but that's your number. You're going to need it. I know, I said. Thank you, Deputy. Just a word of advice, sir, he said, lowering his voice. People like that, they don't stop, they escalate. Watch your back. I'm counting on it, I said. As the patrol car pulled away, I saw a curtain twitch in the window of the house next door. It was Mr. Henderson. He'd been watching the whole thing. The balance of power on Lakeside Landing had just visibly shifted, and the fear was beginning to migrate. The deputy's visit was a turning point. It was the first public crack in Carol Weston's armor of infallibility. For years she had ruled by projecting an aura of absolute authority, of being untouchable. The sight of a uniformed officer siding with me, based on my quiet presentation of documents, sent a ripple through the community. Fearful silence began to give way to cautious curiosity that afternoon, as I was tacking a large sheet of plywood over the hole in my cabin wall. I saw Mr. Henderson walking tentatively down his driveway toward me. He was a retired accountant in his late 70s, a gentle soul who had lived on the lake even longer than I had. I knew for a fact that Carol had fined him into submission over the color of his bird bath. He clutched a small, worn baseball cap in his hands, twisting the brim. Arthur, he began, his voice barely above a whisper. I saw the sheriff. I saw what you did. That was brave. It wasn't bravery, Henry, I said, setting down my hammer. It was paperwork. He managed a weak smile. Well, whatever it was, she's never been spoken to like that. Not by anyone. He took a deep breath, the kind a man takes before jumping into cold water. There's something you should know. Something I should have told you sooner, but I was afraid. It's all right, Henry, she has that effect on people. She called a special emergency board meeting last week to vote on tearing down your cabin, he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. It wasn't a real meeting. She just called her two cronies on the board, Frank and Gary, to her house for coffee. I know, because Frank lives across the street from me, and I saw him go over. Sarah, the other board member, the one who actually reads the rules, wasn't even invited. This was a critical piece of information. The HOA bylaws, which I had read a dozen times, required a quorum of the board for any vote, and all board members had to be given 48 hours notice of any meeting. An unannounced coffee clatch with her allies did not constitute a legal board meeting. But that's not all. Henry continued, his eyes wide. She held the official vote during the regular monthly meeting 2 nights ago, the one you didn't attend. He hesitated. Arthur, I'm ashamed to say this, but I went. We all did. She told us if we didn't vote yes on the cabin's removal, she'd start a full architectural review of our own properties. She threatened us, all of us, with thousands in fines if we didn't back her play. He looked down at his feet. We were cowards. We all voted yes. But I had a feeling. I had a feeling what she was doing was wrong. Illegal even. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, old-fashioned digital voice recorder. I recorded the whole meeting. My heart, which had been a cold, steady drum all day, gave a little leap. An audio recording. The holy grail of disputes like this. A verbatim record, immune to the he said, she said fog of memory. She lied about the vote from the special meeting, Henry said, his voice gaining confidence. She announced that the board had already unanimously approved the demolition, and the community vote was just a formality to ratify it. She didn't allow any discussion. When Sarah tried to ask about the legal basis, about your property rights, Carol shouted her down, said she was out of order. She told everyone that her lawyer had given the green light and that the county was fully behind the demolition. She lied, Arthur. She lied about everything. He held out the small silver device. I don't know if this is useful, but I thought you should have it. I took the recorder from his hand. It felt as heavy and significant as a block of gold. Henry, I said, my voice thick with a gratitude I rarely feel. This is more than useful. This is everything. You have no idea what you've just done. I'm just tired of being bullied, he said, finally looking me in the eye. We all are. The second crack in Carol's dam came that very evening. I got an email from an anonymous address. The subject line was simply meeting minutes. The body of the email contained 2 attachments and a single sentence. The first file is what she submitted as the official record. The second is what actually happened. I'm sorry I wasn't stronger. I opened the first file. It was a PDF of the official minutes for the last HOA meeting, typed up neatly and signed by Carol Weston. It was a work of fiction. It stated that the board presented its unanimous decision, that the legal opinion of counsel was read aloud, and that the community voted overwhelmingly in favor of the demolition after a robust and informative discussion. Then, I opened the second file. It was a Word document, and it was a transcript, a verbatim transcript of Henry's recording. It included every threat, every interruption, every lie. It noted Carol shouting down Sarah. It noted the complete absence of any legal opinion. At the bottom was an unsigned note. I am the board secretary. Carol prepares the minutes and has me sign them. I have kept my own records of the real meetings for the past year. I can't be a party to this anymore. It had to be Sarah, the disillusioned insider. She had reached her breaking point. My quiet one-man stand had given her the courage to act. I now had the official, fraudulent minutes, and the real, transcribed minutes, backed by an audio recording. I had a forged document and the proof of its forgery. The coalition was forming. It wasn't just me anymore. It was me, the quiet professional. It was Henry, the fearful ally, who had provided the key piece of physical evidence. And it was Sarah, the disillusioned insider, who had provided the corroborating documentation from within the enemy camp. Carol, oblivious to the rebellion brewing in her own ranks, was preparing her final, fatal move. She believed the deputy's intervention was a temporary setback, a procedural hiccup. She still thought she controlled the board, the rules, and the narrative. She had been publicly thwarted, and her ego demanded a massive, overwhelming response to re-establish her dominance. 2 days later, a professional process server, a grim-faced man in a cheap suit, knocked on my partially repaired cabin door. He handed me a thick envelope. "You've been served," he grunted, and left. Inside was a masterpiece of legal intimidation, clearly drafted by Carol herself. Though it was on the letterhead of an expensive downtown law firm she must have retained after the sheriff's visit. There was a formal notice of a lien being placed on my property for the amount of $50,000. This included $20,000 in accrued fines, $10,000 for the cost of the contracted demolition, which had been halted, and another $20,000 in projected legal fees and penalties. It also included a summons to a special public hearing of the Lakeside Landing HOA to be held in 1 week's time at the community clubhouse. The purpose of the hearing, it stated, was to provide the homeowner an opportunity to show cause why the lien should not be perfected and foreclosure proceedings initiated. It was a public execution, a show trial. She wasn't just going to take my property, she was going to humiliate me in front of the entire community. She would be the judge, the prosecutor, and the star witness. She would control the room, the microphone, and the agenda. She thought she was dragging me onto her stage, into her world of performance and social pressure. She had no idea I was bringing the courthouse with me. This final, desperate act of escalation was the last piece of evidence I needed. It was an official, legally delivered document, confirming her intent to enforce a fraudulent debt. It was mail fraud. It was an attempt to file a wrongful lien. It was the capstone on the entire edifice of her crimes. I took the thick envelope and placed it carefully on top of my binder. The file was now complete. I called my lawyer, a man I'd known for 30 years, who specialized in real estate and contract law. "Stephen," I said, "it's Arthur, the situation we discussed. It has escalated to the final stage. I need you for a public hearing next Thursday." There was a pause on the other end of the line, then a low whistle. "Arthur, from what you sent me, this isn't a hearing. It's a slaughter. Are you sure you want me there? It might be more satisfying to do it yourself." "You're right," I said. "I'll handle the presentation. I just need you there to be a witness. And to make sure the catering is up to legal standards." He chuckled. "I'll clear my calendar. This is going to be better than the state bar convention." The night of the hearing, the clubhouse was packed. Carol had made sure of it, sending out emails urging every resident to attend to witness the final resolution of the Lot 12 compliance issue. The room was arranged like a courtroom, with a long table at the front for the board members. Carol sat in the center, flanked by her 2 loyalists, Frank and Gary. Sarah, the board secretary, sat at the end of the table, looking pale but resolute. The air was thick with a mixture of nervous tension and smug expectation from Carol's supporters. I arrived exactly on time, not a minute early or late. I was wearing a simple dark suit and tie. My lawyer, Stephen, walked in with me carrying a heavy briefcase. Mr. Henderson was already there, sitting in the front row. He gave me a small, determined nod. I saw a few other faces, people who had been fined or harassed by Carol in the past, watching me with a hopeful curiosity. Carol banged a gavel on the table, a bit of theatrical flair she'd clearly been waiting to use. "This special public hearing of the Lakeside Landing Homeowners Association is now in session," she announced, her voice resonating with self-importance. "The matter before us is the perfection of a lien against Lot 12, owned by Arthur Pendleton, for persistent and egregious violations of the CC&RS. She then launched into her opening statement. It was a masterclass in performative victimhood and righteous indignation. She spoke of her tireless efforts to protect and enhance the community. She painted me as a rogue element, a stubborn old man who refused to play by the same rules as everyone else. She held up glossy, poster-sized photos of my humble cabin, contrasting them with pictures of the manicured lawns and grand facades of the newer homes. "For years," she said, her voice trembling with what she surely thought was convincing emotion, "we have tried to work with Mr. Pendleton. We have sent notices. We have issued fines which he paid, admitting his guilt. We have offered him every opportunity to comply. Instead, he has met our good faith efforts with defiance and contempt." She gestured dramatically toward the photos. This illegal shack is a blight on our beautiful lakefront. It lowers property values for every single person in this room. The board, with the full backing of our legal counsel and the community, voted to have it removed. When we began the board-authorized work, Mr. Pendleton called the police and fabricated a story, temporarily halting the much-needed improvements. Tears welled in her eyes. It was a truly impressive performance. He has left us no choice. The fines, the legal costs, the cost of the removal, they are his responsibility. The lien for $50,000 is fair and just. We are here tonight to finalize it and move forward with creating the beautiful community park that will take this eyesore's place. She sat down, to a smattering of applause from her supporters. She looked at me, a triumphant, pitying smile on her face. "Mr. Pendleton," she said, dripping with condescension, "you have 10 minutes to show cause why this lion should not be perfected." I stood up slowly. I did not go to the podium. I simply stood at my place in the front row. Stephen placed the briefcase on the table in front of me and opened it. "My name is Arthur Pendleton," I began, my voice calm and even, carrying easily in the silent room. "I will not need 10 minutes. I reached into the briefcase and pulled out the first document. It was the official, sealed county plat map. I walked to the front of the room, and ignoring Carol's sputtering protest, I taped it to the wall for everyone to see. "This," I said, "is the Clarion County Plat of Record for Lakeside Landing. It is the single legal document that defines the boundaries of this HOA. As you can all see, the HOA's jurisdiction, shaded here in green, ends at the boundary of Lot 11. My property, Lot 12, is not, and has never been, part of the HOA's common area. This is not a matter of opinion. It is a recorded legal fact." A murmur went through the crowd. I let the silence hang for a moment before continuing. "Mr. Weston's wife has repeatedly claimed that my cabin violates the 50-foot setback rule. However," I continued, pulling out the next document, a certified copy of the HOA's own CC and R's, her own governing document in Article 2, states that the HOA's authority is limited to common areas and structures visible from the street. My home is not visible from the street. Therefore, by the plain language of her own rules, she has no jurisdiction over it whatsoever." The murmuring grew louder. Carol's smile was gone. Her face was a rigid mask. "She has also claimed that the board unanimously voted for this demolition. This is also false." I pulled out Henry's little silver voice recorder and a small Bluetooth speaker. "This is an audio recording of the last community meeting, during which Mr. Weston's wife knowingly lied to you all. She claimed a prior unanimous board vote had occurred. It had not. She claimed her lawyer had approved the action. He had not. She suppressed dissent and coerced a vote through threats. Let's listen." I pressed play. Carol's voice, sharp and bullying, filled the room. "Sarah, you are out of order. Our lawyer has given this the green light. We are not discussing it further. Now, all in favor of ratifying the board's decision to remove the structure on Lot 12. I pressed stop. The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. Sarah, at the end of the board table, was staring at Carol, her chin held high. Frank and Gary were looking at their shoes. "As for the fraudulent meeting minutes that were filed," I said, "I have a copy of those, and I also have a copy of the real transcript provided by a board member who could no longer stomach the deceit." I was dismantling her reality piece by piece with documented facts. Each document was a stone, and I was methodically demolishing the glass house of her authority. "Now let's talk about the dock," I said, my voice dropping slightly. Mr. Weston's wife has for years encouraged you all to use my private dock, calling it a community asset. 2 years ago, she filed an application with the county to have it officially declared as such. I taped the next document to the wall. It was the permit application with a big red "denied" stamp on it. Her application was denied by the Clarion County Code Enforcement Office, I announced. She was officially notified in writing that the dock was on my private property and her claim was fraudulent. She knew for 2 years that she was lying to you. She knew it was my property, and yet she ordered it destroyed. I paused, letting the weight of that sink in. I looked around the room. The faces that had been smug or hostile were now confused, uncertain or angry, not at me. At her. Then came the final blow, the one she could never have anticipated. Finally, I said, we come to the matter of the demolition itself and this $50,000 lien. Mr. Weston's wife hired a contractor to destroy my home. I pulled out the last 2 documents. This is a copy of the invoice from the demolition company. As you can see, it is billed to the Lakeside Landing HOA, but it was personally authorized by Carol Weston. I have confirmed with the treasurer that this was never put to a vote, meaning she illegally spent your HOA funds. And this, I said, holding up the final piece of paper, is the demolition permit she filed with the county to authorize the work. Carol looked relieved for a split second. A permit. She had a permit. It's a very convincing document, I continued quietly. It has the right forms, the right language. It even has a signature at the bottom from the authorizing county official. I looked directly at Carol. Her relief vanished, replaced by a dawning, sickening horror. The signature is mine. It is a very good forgery of the signature I used during my 35 years of service to this county. You see, before I retired to my illegal shack, I was the chief of the Clarion County Code Enforcement Division, the very department she filed this with. A collective gasp went through the room. It was a physical shockwave. Carol Weston went completely, deathly pale. The mask didn't just drop. It shattered. Her face, for the first time since I'd met her, was slack with genuine shock. The performer was gone, replaced by a cornered criminal who had just realized the man she'd been tormenting was the one who wrote the law books. So, to summarize, I said, my voice like ice, Mr. Weston's wife has engaged in a multi-year campaign of harassment. She has knowingly lied to this board and this community. She has misused your funds. She has filed fraudulent documents with the state. She has committed forgery of a public official's signature. And she has ordered the felony destruction of a private residence based on claims she knew were false. This lien is not only invalid, it is evidence of attempted extortion. I turned to my lawyer. Stephen, would you please call Deputy Miller at the sheriff's office? Tell him the public hearing is concluded, and we have several criminal complaints to file. Stephen nodded, pulled out his phone, and stepped into the hallway. Carol didn't move. She just stared at me, her mouth slightly agape, her eyes blank. She had no idea. All this time, she had no idea. She thought she was fighting a lonely old man. She never once bothered to find out who I was. The collapse was total and silent. There was no shouting, no final desperate plea. There was only the quiet, dawning realization of absolute and complete ruin. The aftermath was swift and brutal, but in a quiet, procedural way, just like everything else. Deputy Miller and another officer arrived before the meeting had even officially adjourned. They took statements from me, from Sarah, and from a now very cooperative Frank and Gary, who were desperate to distance themselves from Carol. They took the audio recorder, the forged permit, and the fraudulent minutes into evidence. Carol Weston was not arrested that night, but she was informed, in no uncertain terms, that she was the subject of an active criminal investigation for felony property damage, forgery, and embezzlement. She left the clubhouse without a word, her husband steering her by the elbow, her face a blank sheet of paper. The HOA imploded. An emergency meeting was called the following week, this time run by Sarah. Carol, Frank, and Gary all submitted their resignations via email. A new, temporary board was elected, with Sarah as the interim president and, to my surprise, Mr. Henderson as the treasurer. Their first act was to formally rescind, with prejudice, the $50,000 lien against my property. Their second act was to issue a formal, written apology to me on behalf of the entire community. Their third act was to hire an independent auditor to go over the HOA's finances for the past 5 years. The legal consequences for Carol were severe. The district attorney's office, armed with the mountain of evidence Maria and I had compiled, charged her with 3 felonies. Felony, criminal mischief for the property destruction, forgery for the permit, and embezzlement for the misuse of HOA funds. Faced with the undeniable paper trail, she took a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to the forgery and criminal mischief charges. In exchange for avoiding jail time, she was sentenced to 5 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and was ordered to pay full restitution. That's where my civil suit came in. Stephen filed a lawsuit against Carol and her husband personally. We didn't sue the HOA, they were victims too. We sued the Westons for the cost of rebuilding my cabin exactly as it was, the cost of a new dock, my legal fees, and punitive damages for the years of harassment. Their high-priced lawyer took one look at the evidence from the criminal case and advised them to settle immediately. They wrote me a check for $250,000. It was more than enough. On paper, I had won. The community began to heal. The auditor's report revealed that Carol had been misusing funds for years, paying for personal expenses and vanity projects out of the HOA's accounts. The new board, under Sarah's leadership, began the painstaking process of correcting the damage. They rescinded dozens of unjust fines Carol had levied against residents over the years, and in many cases issued refunds from the recovered funds. The oppressive architectural rules were rewritten to be guidelines rather than commandments. The entire culture of the community shifted from one of fear and suspicion to one of neighborly cooperation. People started talking to each other again. Mr. Henderson's bird bath is now a lovely shade of cerulean blue, and no one says a word. The Westons sold their house a few months later, at a significant loss, and moved away. I never saw Carol again. She simply vanished, another performer who had been booed off the stage. I used the settlement money to rebuild. I hired the best local craftsmen, and we rebuilt the cabin board by board, exactly as it had been. We used aged cedar and pine, so it looked like it had been standing there for 30 years. We even replicated the slight sag in the porch roof that Eleanor had always called its wry smile. The new dock is identical to the old one, right down to the specific type of cleat I prefer for tying up my canoe. It is, once again, my quiet place. The final piece of the puzzle was the most satisfying. At my request, the new HOA board, using the official county plat map as their guide, paid for a licensed surveyor to come out and physically mark the boundaries between the HOA common area and the original private lots. Small, brass markers are now embedded in the ground, undeniable points of fact. The community picnic area was eventually built, but it was built on actual community land, 100 yards down the shore. I sit on my porch now, in the quiet of the morning, with my cup of coffee. The lake is calm. The only sounds are the ones that belong here. The file folder, my thick binder of evidence, sits on a shelf in my office in town. I don't look at it, but I know it's there. It's a tangible record of a battle fought not with anger, but with process. A testament to the simple, profound power of a well-documented fact. Sometimes I look at the new brass survey stake at the edge of my lawn, glinting in the sun. It's just a small piece of metal in the ground, but it represents something immense. The line between what is mine and what is not. The line between order and chaos. Carol Weston tried to erase that line, to rewrite reality with the force of her own will, but the line was always there, on paper, waiting patiently to be revealed. She thought the rules were whatever she said they were. She had no idea that the real rules, the quiet, unyielding, written-down rules were infinitely more powerful. They don't need to shout. they just need to be read. And in the end, they are all that remains. Peace has been restored. The books are balanced. The file is closed.